Star Wars: The Last Jedi came out this past weekend, and much like every other Star Wars film, it instantly ignited a massive discussion on the internet revolving around the quality of the movie and just about everything else. These Star Wars movies have become such huge events at this point that everyone is expected to tweet something about them, people monitor the Rotten Tomatoes scores like hawks, and most of all, when two fans disagree, things get real brutal real fast.
If you're a fan and you like that movie, I seriously hate every inch of your body, mind, and spirit and would absolutely force choke you like Vader if it was physically possible.
We live in a culture now that overhypes, overdramatizes, and overanalyzes every movie, but nowhere is this near as bad as in the Star Wars fandom. Now, to be sure, analyzing films isn't something to be discouraged, but I do think it's coming to a point now where people want everything in Star Wars specifically to be iconic, worthy of putting on a t-shirt, exactly what they expected, and to make them feel like they're a kid again watching the original trilogy. Anything below that bar is worse than the prequels and the next Jar Jar Binks, whatever that means.
Jar Jar is the worst character in all of Star Wars. Disney, hold my beer.
In this video, I want to discuss both why this movie in particular is so polarizing and why I think many fans are holding it to an improper standard and missing the point and message of the story. Now, don't take that to mean that I think The Last Jedi is perfect. If you're looking for reasons to dislike this film or be critical of it, there are plenty of valid arguments that you could make against it. This movie has some major issues with pacing and plot structure, and the tone can be inconsistent. There also might be one too many red herrings, and a couple characters get a bit of short shrift in the script. The comedy of the situation, though, is that none of the people who supposedly hate this movie and say it ruined Star Wars are making those valid points. The backlash over the film is a whole lot more surface level and frankly unfair than it should be. So please, dislike the movie all you want, but at least dislike it for actually valid reasons. My thoughts on the film aren't entirely relevant here, but suffice to say that personally, I really liked it. This is the first Star Wars movie in a while that I feel has some very resonant, nuanced, and well-integrated themes throughout the narrative, and the dilemmas the characters experience throughout the story are very complex and unique, especially for Star Wars. The performances here are some of the best from Star Wars as a whole, especially from Mark Hamill and Adam Driver, and in general, it was just really refreshing to see a movie that actually expanded on this mythos instead of just retreading the same ground we've been going over for 30 years. X-Wings, TIE Fighters, Blue Lightsaber, the Millennium Falcon! Yes, this movie contains all of those elements, but it also feels like it's making some attempt to do something new and begin a fresh era of Star Wars that doesn't rely on old canon to exist. It's going to have to, or this universe is going to get real old real fast. The response to this movie has been divisive to say the least, and nothing if not single-minded. When I found out people were hating the movie, I was honestly shocked, because usually when it comes to these big blockbusters, the crazy fans tend to judge the movie based on very surface-level things, like how many cool fights or epic moments there are. Now, I don't think that's how you should judge a movie, but if you are judging it that way, and I think many do, The Last Jedi is crazy cool. The funny thing is, both sides of fans see the other side as the one who hasn't caught up with the times. If you loved the movie, the people who hate it are like the people who hated The Empire Strikes Back when it came out. In 30 years, they'll look back and say this is the best Star Wars movie. But if you hated the movie, the people who loved it are like the people who loved The Phantom Menace when it came out.
It was amazing. It was everything I thought it was going to be and more.
They're just blinded by the hype and too stupid to see how bad this movie really is. But, so, we've talked about the overdone backlash to this movie. We've talked about some of the more valid criticisms of the film that aren't being addressed. And we've talked about what the movie does well. So what's garnering it all this hate from the fan base, specifically online? Well, I think it certainly has a lot to do with expectations. And I don't just mean expectations based on the 2-year gap between this film and The Force Awakens. I'm talking about bigger expectations that have been built up for over 30 years. The hype for this movie officially began at the moment Return of the Jedi ended and people were left to wonder what Luke Skywalker did next. And the problem with these sequels to older franchises is that whatever you imagined in your head for 30 years would happen after the original film is always going to be infinitely better, at least to you, than anything a studio ever comes up with. There's also like a major demographic of people who are completely against seeing their favorite characters like Luke Skywalker depicted as flawed in any way. With this film, lots of fans understandably complained about not getting to see the perfect, wise Jedi Master version of Luke Skywalker that they had dreamed about after Return of the Jedi, and being presented with a tired, broken, hopeless version of the character instead. The idea that Luke would ever make a mistake after the original trilogy or evolve in any way seems like it's unheard of, even though clearly it's a far more interesting approach to take than a version of Luke who just kicks butt and looks cool. I'm not even making this stuff up. There are people who are legit angry that the heroes of the original trilogy now have flaws.
Don't go see Star Wars if you cherish your childhood. #NotMyLuke. These movies are way worse than prequels. Not only are they trash, they managed to destroy all our favorite characters and turn them into failures. They were heroes. They saved the galaxy. No, they're a joke. At Rian Johnson, worst Star Wars movie to date. You single-handedly character assassinated Luke Skywalker. Oh, but let's not forget the critics love it. #Disney murders Star Wars.
For many, the idea that Luke would ever even consider killing his own student to stop the dark side is unheard of. That's not the Luke I know, many of them shout, ignoring the fact that, 30 years have passed and maybe he's changed a bit from the Luke that you knew. I don't know. But aside from that, the idea that he's not the Luke you know is literally the point. This is a version of Luke who is so desperate, so fearful of the dark side enveloping the galaxy once again, that he briefly falls into a moment of weakness because he's seen what this kind of evil has done before. But as he says in the movie, that moment passes in an instant. He's no cold-blooded killer, and he knows it. Unfortunately, it's his failure to come to his senses that ultimately brings about the dark side anyway. In his attempt to stop fate, he ended up being instrumental in Kylo Ren's rise. Failure, and how we let it define us, is a pretty major part of this movie in its entirety. Luke fails as a master and a teacher, letting his fear consume him, his students turn to the dark, and then hiding away on an island. The Jedi previously failed as heroes and protectors, destroying themselves from the inside and becoming almost religious zealots before their fall. Poe Dameron fails as a leader, and in turn, his plan involving Finn and Rose fails as well. This gets lots of people killed, with only a handful of Resistance members making it out alive by the end of the film. That's why I don't hate the stuff on the casino planet Canto Bight as much as some do. Sure, the plan fails and ultimately isn't integral to the plot because of that. But if the good guys succeed at everything every time, what's the point? The Empire Strikes Back features a similar amount of plans gone awry and heroes not getting their way, and people call that film a bold and dark turn in the series. Also, I don't think the bit with the giant space worm served much purpose in the plot, but hey, there you go. In The Last Jedi, what the characters do with their failures is integral to the message of the movie. Just as Yoda says, failure is the greatest teacher. And while you could go and hide away on an island and try to forget that it ever happened, the best thing to do is learn from your mistakes and actively try to stop repeating the past. When The Force Awakens was released in 2015, many people thought repeating the past was the best possible phrase to describe it, and they're not wrong. While it's well acted, entertaining, and I really enjoy it, The Force Awakens is still no doubt a beat-for-beat remake of A New Hope. Because of this, a precedent was set that this new trilogy was just going to be a rehash of the originals. The Last Jedi would be a remake of Empire, and Episode 9 would be a remake of Return of the Jedi, with very little creativity or deviation from the norm. But the genius of this film is that Rian Johnson knows exactly what you think is going to happen. He knows that if he shows you a swampy island with a wise old mentor, or a throne room with an evil emperor, you'll jump to conclusions and assume history is going to repeat itself, when in fact, Johnson has no plans of repeating anything. This is what makes the message of the movie about learning from your failures all the more resonant. If the heroes of this new trilogy just do exactly what the heroes of the past did, and the plot of each movie just mirrors something that came before it, they're doomed to repeat the same loop of war over and over again. Like Benicio del Toro's character says, you blow them up today, they blow you up tomorrow. The scene with Yoda and the burning of the Jedi texts is essentially about breaking the cycle, because if you don't, it's going to be Empire 2.0 and Empire 3.0 and Empire 4.0 forever.
Through the ages, I've seen evil take many forms. The Sith, the Empire. Today, it is the First Order.
Sometimes, even good things, like the Jedi Order or, say, Star Wars nostalgia, need to die so that they can be reborn into something better. So when Luke marches out onto the battlefield to confront Kylo and the First Order, he knows that the old Jedi way of just waving a lightsaber at your opponent isn't going to truly win the battle this time. Instead, he sacrifices his life to do something that inspires hope in the galaxy, at the idea of one man staring down an entire army, and inspires doubt and conviction in the conflicted Ben Solo. For lots of fans, the idea of tearing down, deconstructing, or reimagining Star Wars is basically blasphemy, and I guess I get that. Neither The Force Awakens or Rogue One managed to elicit this kind of negative response so fast when they were released. I think this is due largely to the fact that both those films, for better or worse, are essentially Star Wars comfort food. They're fun, they're entertaining, they're technically really well made. I would even say Force Awakens specifically is a well-written movie. But for the most part, they exist to remind you why you loved Star Wars to begin with, and not to create new reasons to love it. With The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson said, "What if we took what everybody assumed they'd get with this movie and gave them something original to grab onto? What if instead of giving fans Rey Skywalker or Rey Kenobi like they were so sure they'd eventually receive, we just made Rey a character who stands out on her own merits, proving that heroes can come from just about anywhere?" So much of The Last Jedi is being panned purely because it didn't live up to very specific expectations people had for it. The fundamentally misguided assumption geek culture makes when they see Star Wars is that it was made specifically for them. But Star Wars has never been some sort of niche property that caters to a very small demographic of hardcore fans. The beauty and the tragedy of this franchise is that it exists to please everyone. And Rian Johnson wanted to make decisions that would reinvent the franchise and keep it fresh and original, not reaffirm fan theories and insert fun details about how Snoke is really Darth Plagueis. Let's be honest, that's not what this is really about. So that's what I have to say about Star Wars: The Last Jedi. You may disagree, and that's fine. Like I said, there's a pretty wide array of valid criticisms for this movie. I just don't feel like people are articulating them enough. But whether we agree or disagree about this stuff, and whether you care about Star Wars at all, there's one thing that we know for certain. The porgs were not overused at all! They were hilarious, and if you didn't think they were funny, you're dead inside! Thanks for watching!